Hello, this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network every Thursday at 1 p.m. And you could also find me on theconsciousresistance.com and theseedsofliberty.com. So today we have Michael Shanklin, who's a pure freedom lover. He's the founder of Statism is Slavery Facebook page, and he's a former Libertarian Party director in North Carolina, right?
Correct.
North Carolina, yeah. So today we'll talk about we'll talk a little bit about using politics to affect change, to promote freedom. Is it futile? Is it is it beneficial? We'll get into that, and perhaps what his opinion on Rand Paul is, and perhaps some peaceful parenting, since he's also he's got the future of his child to look forward to, so I'm sure that's on his mind quite a bit. So so Michael, thanks a lot for coming on to the show.
Well, thanks for having me here. Danilo, I've seen your work over the years, and what you put out for freedom and the defense that you stand for. It really gives me inspiration, and I think we feed off each other, so that's always a good thing. You've been really battling lately and pushing the channel forward, so I actually want to extend my gratitude and thank you live and in public for everybody to hear, because I do appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I really love the Voluntary Virtues Network. That's really how I came onto the YouTube scene. I really wasn't active before then, I guess writing a little bit, but doing videos is a whole lot different than writing articles. You reach a completely different audience, that watches videos rather than just sits down and reads an article. So can you get into a little bit of your history, like how you became a voluntarist and perhaps how you got into the Libertarian Party, which I guess is before.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, definitely. I was born into a family who, although somewhat political, not very little politics. I think the libertarian strain was always connected to my family. Maybe not the extended generations, but the more recent ones. I think most libertarians have come about more recently than they have in the past historically, right? And so when I was raised into a family, it was mostly actually a pro-military family. And a lot of them, I almost went into the military myself. And I can remember when I was younger and in high school, I really sympathized with the social freedoms that the Democrats were offering, right? I mean, treating people as individuals, respecting each other. I didn't take it to the depth of individual property rights and how everybody should have, their property rights respected. But it was something in line with that. It was very tangible to me. Was some of the social freedoms, such as the war on drugs, I always thought was kind of nonsensical. I thought, well, there's all these statistics to show you that you go to implement this policy that you think is going to stop drug usage or whatever positive thing you think is going to come out of it, and it's only created more. It's like putting a machete to a pig. It's not going to end up the best, right? So I've always looked back on it like that from that perspective. The other social freedoms, such as why do you need to be in my marriage? There was a time in me that I was raised, not really pro-statism extreme. But most of us were raised in a statist society, right? I mean, most of the people around us have no idea what we're talking about, what we're going to be talking about over the next hour here, as far as individual freedom, really at the level that we're talking at. And I was just one of those other people. This is years ago, once again. And I can remember thinking, I want to go and fight for freedom. I want to protect my family. I want to be a good guy. I mean, who doesn't want to be a good guy, right? And so you see the slogan, support the troops, et cetera. And then you just think that, it's like you're, cows going to the trough. You're just following everybody else to what they think is great, right? And so as I got older, I started to research more about business. I was young and I started to go out into the marketplace. I actually started really young at this grocery store. I was only like 14 and a half. It was the youngest you could work in Kansas at the time. And I was in Kansas City. And right after that, I went to go work for this tire shop. And when I was at the tire shop, I was under 18. And one day, these inspectors came around. And they were from OSHA. A lot of you, I'm sure, understand what OSHA is. They're a safety compliance type regulation type government agency. And when they came around that day, I realized real quickly that I wasn't supposed to be doing some of the things that I'd always been doing at that job. Not that I had failed at the job or not done them properly or successfully, et cetera, but it was just that somebody had mandated that I'm not allowed to do this one skill because I'm not old enough. This is what they said, which I couldn't use the lifts on the car to lift up the cars. And so, because I would do tire work and brakes and stuff like that. And once again, I was 15, 16 years old. And so they said, my boss told me, just don't touch the lift while OSHA's here and just have somebody else come get the lift for you. I was like, okay. But, it started when I got to more into the real world and actually going out and living on my own and creating my own income and revenue. I started to realize more things about the world. And it did make me want to learn more about business. Not that I was really pro-profit or against profit at the time, but I just wanted to learn more about what the heck all this is, right? And, I'd heard some of the Marxist lingo back in the day, and a lot of it, once again, resonated because of the social freedom sides that they supposedly eschew. But I started to really see how economic freedom was really the driving factor between the difference between a society that's prosperous and a society that's really in abject poverty. Everywhere that I'd look around that had what was considered more limited government or smaller government or closer to no government, they had more prosperity. And America was, for a long time at the helm, right? They were number one. And it's only as of over the last decade that they've really dropped to 10th or 12th in the indices of economic freedom, excuse me. And, but still, we're still technically one of the more freer places on paper. This is when you're comparing tariffs, taxes, regulations, and, I could go on for other things, sanctions, et cetera, regulatory burdens on employees. So I realized that economic freedom and social freedoms are not as divided as the political system. Like the Republicans will be all for your freedom economically or for your gun rights, and that's just about it, right? Then they want to get government into marriage. They want to get government into X, Y, and Z, right? I mean, name something social freedom issue, war on drugs. Nixon, obviously, I shouldn't have to say anything else. And on the Democrat side, right, they want to do all the social freedom things like let you smoke your pot. This is what they portray. I'm not saying either party really does these things in action, but this is the way that they portray and they sell themselves, right? Because remember, the political system is just as much a salesman as anybody else, except for the fact they don't have to back themselves up with a quality product. And so I started to realize that this thing, that freedom is really actually connected to the hips, the social freedoms and the economic freedoms. And so as I started to understand that more, it made me say, well, the Democrats are wrong on trying to, violently monopolize and nationalize all these things to the state. I don't want to live in Russia. Right? That obviously that kind of society doesn't work. And every time I look at another third world country, I see societies that have usually had extreme regulations and taxation, huge government burdens, even though people will say it's like corporations coming in there with their free market. I know better, right? I'm not fooled by the political left-right, the mumbo jumbo. I realize that these people do not have their individual property rights. They've been abused. I actually did a paper in college. This is part of my progression. It was on the Niger Delta. And I showed how Shell, although they were coming in and taking advantage of a region that was violently monopolized and really politically torn, one of the instances was they had a huge string of pollution that was done by the Shell Corporation. And what they don't tell you about this is that, sure, Shell might have won the contract for this region, but if it wasn't them, it would have been somebody else. I can't really blame a few entrepreneurs who are like, well, there's resources here that we can actually make value out of for the rest of the world. I'm sorry that these people live in such a tyrannous society where the government's violently monopolized all the oil fields and, of course, not allowed the poor people to have the property rights. So I wrote a paper showing how property rights were going to, if they strengthen the property rights of the poorest people in the region, how they wouldn't have their lands polluted because then they could actually file suits against Shell and the government because they were at this point, so much fascism and socialism. They're all looking like the same thing, right? Shell was Niger and Niger was Shell in essence in these regions. So I was trying to show how property rights would help the poor people because right now they have no way to take this to court because they have no ground because it's not their property, right? So what are you gonna do? You're gonna, if you're think of this, be in the scenario of the poor person in Niger. You come out of the Niger Delta that's all destroyed by these oil fields, and you say, well, that's my land, and what's the government gonna say? Prove it, right? Well, if you have no property rights, it's just like, well, you have no claim here. Move along, right? Mm-hmm. With a society of property rights and individual freedom, these people would say, here, I have property rights and you guys damaged my property and now you owe me restitution, et cetera. Right. I'm not saying that it's a perfect world, but I'm trying to say they have no standing whatsoever under a state of society. And in a free society, I started to realize that was really the only true defense. Everybody else wants to give them foreign aid and all these other nonsensical things, which only is going to strengthen the tyrannous grip of their communist government over there. Right. And so I knew that economic freedom was really the backbone, and that this divide that the left and right paradigm has tried to really cast over our eyes of breaking up social freedoms and economic freedom. It was a farce. And it really started to appeal to me that, maybe none of these parties are right? Maybe this whole thing's futile. And I started to look into the Libertarian Party. And I started to realize, every time I read something from the Libertarian Party, it was like, wait, that really is in line with what I believe, right? I mean, it was like, get government out of marriage. I believe that. Get government out of your guns. I believe that. Get government out of your wallet. I believe that. It was like perfect. It was like, get government to stop shooting other people in wars. And I'm like, this is great. And they were like, get government out of my money. And I'm like, I'm loving this, because obviously most people think like only governments can produce money. Well, all they can do is produce this paper currency, which tries to replace the real money, which we all know is gold and silver. I mean, that's what has won out historically, statistically, through spontaneous order, which is the right way to do it. And that the current system is nothing more than a distortion of real money. And so somebody like me, who understood how deep the central banking policies actually go, it made perfect sense to me as I started to educate myself more on the bigger spectrum, the bigger picture, the bird's eye view of politics. So I still thought that there was some chance with the political party. So I jetted right into the Libertarian Party, obviously. I mean, it was like, we're on the Titanic and it's sinking, and the lifeboat, the only one that's going to stand it, and I know, and I can see that all the other ones have holes in them. People, they can keep rushing to those other boats, but I'm going to take my family to the one that I know doesn't have holes. And so I saw the Libertarian Party and I jumped on. And quickly, I really tried to get very active. And I became the political director, and I was elected onto the executive committee. And I became a campaign manager for a U.S. Senate candidate. His name was Dr. Mike Beitler. Very, very calm gentleman, not an anarchist, but a very extreme anarchist. In fact, he wrote a book called Rational Individualism, which I think he really took parts and pieces from Ayn Rand. I think he was an Ayn Rand, supporter. I was at this time battling in my head. I'd seen some Lark and Rose videos. I'd seen some Molyneux videos, and they just made sense to me. And this is years ago, right? I mean, we're talking what? So 2009. So 6-7 years ago almost. Anyway, so, I was researching all kinds of things on anarchism. And of course, I even came across the whole ANCOM versus ANCAP thing. And, it blew me away how there's this like whole other intellectual world that most people, when I go to the Golden Corral down the street, have no idea about, right? It really was like, whoa, like these people who are just shoveling ice cream down their throats and never pick up a book on philosophy have no idea of any of this stuff. And it made me only want to dig in deeper, because I'm a guy who, if I'm like a hound dog, man, if I sniff something, I'm going to be searching for it for a couple hours unless you stop me. I'll start myself, right? So I started jumping into it. This is, I think, the story with most people. It's like, well, how'd you become an anarchist? Well, I was curious, right? I think that's probably the best answer, because that's really how it happens to most of us. We're like, well, I want to know more. I'm not okay with just knowing this basic amount of BS that I'm fed. I want to go out there and prove whether the BS is real or not. And if it's real, that's fine. But I came back and realized that most of the stuff I'd learned, when I started looking back on public school and private school, I went to both schools, and really the public school was all about the war. This war happened, and this general did this, and it never made any sense to me. When I went to business school later on in college, and I could look back on all my other schooling, I realized they did much more entrepreneurship. You had more case studies of real life things that were outside of war and bombs, right? But that was what U.S. history was bombs and war. And I was like, whoa, wait, why are they only talking about like all the wars from the states to the states? Is because they have to, because that's like the victor writes the history books, and they weren't joking around, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I think a lot of people think now. It's become this niche with U.S. history. But when I was stop me if you want to go somewhere else at any time.
No, go ahead. Go
But
ahead. It's good. It's fine.
okay. So, I was really deep into the Libertarian Party for a while there. And as I was starting to research more of the anarchism stuff, I started to realize, wow, I might actually be an anarchist. I mean, can I actually say that in the mirror and look at myself, not crazily, right? I mean, it just sounds weird because you've been, once again, force-fed all this BS. It's chaos. And, what's Merriam-Webster say about it? It's like, it's an unlawful society, which we know it has rules. It's just ridiculous, right? So it's just backwards. I mean, everything I had learned, I had to take with a grain of salt moving forward. And it was kind of like having to start life all over again, but it's like you finally found the real life, and now you can finally have a real life, right? Where everybody else is still stuck in that hamster wheel of that yesterday's mind, right? And so, I just kept wanting to run towards the treadmill, and I really took a pretty big jump into the deep end of ANCAP. And I started to understand that praxeologically humans act, right? And it's not groups of humans that have like this collective brain per se. Not that I'm anti-collectivism, because I think voluntarism is a form of peaceful collectivism. That's another discussion. But I realized that praxeologically individuals act. And that because individuals act, we have to, we all have our own preferences and value systems that we are basing ourselves and our lives off of, and also what our interactions with others. But because of that subjective theory of value, we have to respect each other's individual. I mean, I guess we don't have to. I guess a murderer doesn't have to respect somebody else. But in the line of having a society that's peaceful and prosperous, we do have to respect other people and their decisions. And that extends into property, right? And I really sided with the ANCOM. I tried to really meet them halfway for many years there, until I just realized that without property, not only of justly acquired property, but of body, you have nothing, right? And this is where the war on drugs stems from. It's not because it's from a lack of property rights. It's because the state is anti-property, not like the communists think, where you have property and the state supports property for the few capitalists, which you could say it kind of does on that aspect. But that for the rest of us, it doesn't. In that, in essence, that would be the correct statement, because the war on drugs has to steal our property from us to fund their infringements of other people's property, right? So it's like this huge cycle of masochism that's going on inside of the state. And I started to realize without property rights, we have no freedom. Without property, there is no freedom. Without the individual, and I want to make sure I stress this, individual property rights, because it stems from the individual, really. So it's not like one group of people can have property and the other group can't, right? This is why chain slavery and chattel slavery was obviously a complete farce once again. And of course, why we see it under the heaviest statist systems back in the day, and there's least statist systems today in some aspects. You're obviously seeing a relaxation. Back in the day, you couldn't even wear a bikini on the beach in many beaches in the U.S., and that's kind of died off now. You used to have tickets written up for wearing too short of shorts and bikinis. That kind of nonsense is gone now, right? And that's a part of the social freedoms. Sadly, a lot of the economic freedoms are still being taken, and people can't see the economic freedom infringements as easily as the social freedom, right? Because when the state comes out and they say, we're going to ban marriage, I mean, that's pretty clear cut and dry. Everybody knows that their marriage is regulated on some aspect or another. They might not think that deep on it, but it's there at least somewhat subconsciously. With economics, though, it might affect only 10 people who try to go up against the regulation that's there, right? And most people will never hear about that battle or that fight. So I do see the economic freedom side. And then, of course, you'll have the people in the Republican Party, and they'll parrot all day that they're for economic freedom. But they're not. I mean, they'll still tax you. They still indebt your grandchildren. They still will plunder overseas. They don't respect property rights at all either, right? So this whole I'm going to cut taxes, they become really, when people say they become the party of no, it really is the anti whoever the Democrats have in power right now, and in some cases that anti that black guy, right? This is how the idiots really think. I mean, when you get down to the level, they're not thinking at all. And so this is the kind of the world that when you wake up to that, you're just like, all of this is just completely bunk. It's all an infringement of other people. I think one of the best ways to think about this too, I started to think years ago as in, well, how did the first humans live, right? It's kind of like when you're trying to decide, when you get older and you're trying to find a more healthy diet, and you don't know what that healthy diet is, you say, what did my dad do? Well, what did my great grandpa do? What did my ancestors do? What have they eaten for all these years? Maybe I should do something similar because my body's probably adapted for that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I see that a lot of people just don't ask these questions philosophically, and the very few who do end up becoming the voluntarists around us. So that's really been my progression. After that, I went back into the private sector, and I tried to set a good example. I really try not to talk too much politics with people who have never talked politics before. I like to friend people. I like knowing lots of people. I happen to know like a lot of people in the internet world and outside in my real life every day. And, I like having those personal conversations with them. But there's so many people, and people will find out already what I've done and all the other work I've done, and they'll ask me questions about it anyway. So I usually have that, I kind of have that blessing, whereas other people who are active might have to go out there and spur the discussion more. I have a lot of people coming to me and spurring the discussion with me, which actually helps. It's kind of like inbound marketing versus outbound. Outbound's the old school style. I'm in sales and marketing, for those who don't know. Mm-hmm. And the old school way of sales and marketing really was interruption marketing, interruption sales, where you're going out there and you're creating an ad in the Super Bowl, which, that still works on a level too, right? But today, people block out advertisement much better than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's because we're bombarded with it all the time, 100 times more than we used to be. So it's sensical that people would block it out. And so what's the key to do is to build up a strong resource center where people will come to you and turn to you as I don't want to say it like in a bad way, but as an authority figure on a subject, right? So somebody who's knowledgeable, something, not somebody who's a tyrant, but that kind of knowledgeable authority. And so, letting them come to me, I think, has been a pretty big success. And a lot of them have listened. I got to say, it's much easier today with the internet, and like we can have these conversations face to face right here, matter of seconds. People still throughout the world, a lot of them don't have this opportunity or this ability. And so I think this has really helped getting the message of freedom out there. And more people are more receptive today than they have been in the past. This is just my experience. Once again, I'm only in my earlier 30s. So it's not like I have 80 years of experience on the subject. I can just tell you, people used to be more, especially pre 9/11. I never heard anything about third parties in general at all. It was always a Republican and Democrat, everything. Now today, most people hate politicians. Most people just have a strong dislike for the political system as a whole. Not that they don't believe you have to do something to change it, to fix it, et cetera. Maybe we can get into that next. But that's been my journey. I jumped out of the Libertarian Party personally because I didn't think it was going to be an avenue towards to true freedom. Some people say you have to use it as like kind of a segue to get to the next thing if you're ever going to get to real market anarchy, which is what I support. And I sympathize with people on that. I wish it was true. And, I wish they would really hurry up and bring freedom to us. I'm just joking, Libertarian Party supporters. But the thing is, we know it's kind of like money, and maybe we can get into Bitcoin too. Some people are really heavy on Bitcoin. I am not pro or anti-Bitcoin. My whole thing with Bitcoin is it could be almost anything out there that is not controllable and that has some form of scarcity like that. And the state, when I say by controllable, I mean you can't print off more. But it is controllable in the essence that you can regulate it. And that's always been a big fear of mine. Obviously, look at countries that have outright banned Bitcoin. Sure, some people are going to find ways to get them through the internet, through the Tor dark network. And they're going to have those kinds of people who are doing this stuff illegally. But it really bugs me that the problem is the state monopolistic controls over currency and an attempt to replicate money. That is really the bad thing that we have to stick with. It's not that some other thing I think is going to come along and fix it. And I view the Libertarian Party in the same manner. I don't see a system in which is controlled by the system opening up and freeing itself anytime soon. If anybody you can tell who's in politics, especially at the top of this thing, anybody who's a senator, congressman, president, anybody, or even an assistant of them, these people are such narcissistic control freaks when you talk to them. They literally think that they have a right to control you. It's just like I think people should have the right to individual freedom. They think that they have the right to be tyrants, right? And it just blows me away. Even the people who are supposedly pro-freedom on something, right? So many people are like, I sympathize with Edward Snowden. I'm like, but you're supporting the same system that's holding him down, right? Like some of the Democrats are very sympathetic for what Edward Snowden's gone through to expose all the crimes that the state officials have committed. But then they'll go out and support the same system that's tyrannizing all of us. It blows me away how people really can't disconnect themselves from the system that they've basically been incubated in, right? And so it's produced these little chickens that are led on a chain, and there's just so many of them. It's almost impossible for us voluntarists to really crack through that mainstream shell.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Oh, do you hear?
Oh, yeah.
You hear that? That's freedom, Bo. I have an Air Force base right near me.
Oh, do you? Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, wonderful history there. It's really fascinating. I don't think I have nearly as spectacular a history. I more grew up in a fiercely Democratic family, and I voted for Obama. I usually say that once every show in 2008, but I know better now, so I completely shy away from it. Although there is a lot of libertarians that do support voting. It's just not my style. It's like some people choose to go the political route, maybe to affect more change, but it's just not my style. So.
Well, here, let me give my 2 cents on voting real quick. Just get it in the open, because I've had lots of people ask me about this. Voting itself, I do not feel that voting is an infringement on anybody else's property or freedom. As long as you are supporting a candidate who is a true anarcho-capitalist, right? They can fraud you in the end. Yeah. And they could be the biggest statist, Stalin-esque douchebag in the world. But the point is, if you're really sincerely in your heart and intentionally voting for somebody who you think is going to be an anarcho-capitalist and not infringe on other people's property and freedom, that to me is not you're not hurting anybody else. You're stuck. You're a slave inside of the system, just like any of us are. Democracy is nothing but a system that legalizes infringements through the guise of saying, okay, as long as you get enough neighbors to do it, right? And anybody who has half a wit on them can understand and see right through that. It's a scam to keep a few people in control, to the rest of us scurrying to try to limit these people's power. It's a complete joke, and of course, the people who are at the top of the chain are always gonna have control of the chain, right? I mean, that's just how it works. So voting in essence might be futile in my opinion, but I don't think it's necessarily an infringement as long as you're voting for an ANCAP. If you're voting for anybody other than an ANCAP, in my opinion, you're just supporting the lesser of. It's kind of like saying, imagine we're in an ANCAP world right now, and somebody is like, well, if you don't vote for the guy who's going to stab you 7 times, or your neighbor 7 times, and that means you're automatically voting for the guy who stabs you 14 times. It's like, well, no. And not only that, how about I don't vote for any stabbings at all? Sure, I might still get stabbed 14 or 7 times. And really, even if you vote, it's not going to change the election thing anyway. So, it's just so many fallacies built up on other fallacies. It just like snowballs. But as long as you're voting for an ANCAP, to me, that's not an infringement. Do you want to get into Rand Paul real quick?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Let us know your opinion on that whole thing.
Okay. Well, and once again, just like I don't, I'm not anti-Obama. I'm anti having rulership systems where tyrants are
That's
over
exactly
other people.
what
Right?
I tell people. I'm not anti-Obama, I'm not anti-US. I'm anti the idea of government and the idea of a ruler.
That's right.
Exactly,
That's right.
Exactly.
So in the same essence, I'm not anti Rand Paul per se. I'm just anti this illusion that you're going to have some supposed guy go in there. He should be really basing his time educating people on real freedom versus going out there and saying, support me to bring somewhat semi-freedom, right? And I think he is playing the game. I think he knows what he's doing. I think he knows that anarchy is right. And I think he realizes that it's nowhere close to being implemented, unfortunately. And he's just trying to play the game. Does that mean that the game is responsible and mature? No. If anything, I think it's a very dangerous game. He's going out there and saying, libertarian is equals some of these infringements, right? I mean, that's all I hear. So instead of him saying, and don't get me wrong, like once again, he's supposedly anti-war on drugs, even though I've seen videos of him. It kind of like there's actually many videos of him flip-flopping. I mean, I never supported any of the other candidates, and the flip-flopping really was a cue to me. Hey, wait, there's something wrong with this guy if he's telling so many different people on camera so many different things, right? I saw a video of Rand where he was talking about being pro-war on drugs. I saw another video where he was saying he was anti-war on drugs. So I'm like, what's your opinion here, man? You know, it's all over YouTube. I think it's got like 1 million hits already. But it's kind of like when people see people like this, they're not setting a sturdy, consistent example. They're wishy-washy. They're all over the place. And that immediately equates to what libertarianism is. Don't you get it? The Koch brothers are libertarians, and ANCAPs can't be libertarians because libertarians are the party. And to me, there's big L's and there's small L's. I happen to be a small L, so I don't play that whole I'm going to try and game the system thing and try to fool people into thinking libertarianism is X, Y, and Z for a short period. I am the long-term marathon runner. Screw this 100-meter sprint. I want the whole 20K. So I'm like saying, listen, we need to actually come back to first principles. We need to take this back, not to deontological route, to praxeology. Even if you're a consequentialist in essence or utilitarian, you can even meet me halfway because I think my arguments fodder both. So I have always said that Rand Paul, I think he knows what's going on. And I think that if he got elected, he would cut a lot of government. Don't get me wrong. But the government afterwards, I think, would go right back into the hands of somebody else that's not a Republican or Democrat, or that's not even a minarchist libertarian. And it would kind of just be like a blimp in the charts. That'd be my opinion. I don't see it being, if anything, it might even set anarcho-capitalism back because it'll take all these people who were anarcho-capitalists, who are supporting anarcho-capitalism and say, let's spend these 4 years of our lives focusing on what this one guy who's almost anarcho-capitalism can do inside the state, which I think is futile once again. So, it's kind of like if you don't like ISIS, well, go and join them and change it from the inside. It's kind of like, no, that's not how it works. And to only compound the difficulties of understanding what libertarianism is at a base, I think that's very damaging. It's kind of like, poisoning the well, and that's the way I view it.
Yeah. What I frequently tell people is, there's one of my favorite quotes is, sending in a good man to reform the state is like sending in a virgin to reform the whorehouse. One of my favorite lines. It's like, and like Stefan Molyneux frequently says, why are you going to go after the biggest mafia in the world and think you're going to change it? Why don't you start small? Why don't you start the KKK, right? Change the KKK into a black.
If you can't even change them,
into
you
a
can't
black
change anybody else.
or
that's right.
Or the mafia into a charity. It starts small. Like, why are you going to go after the big monster? So,
that's right.
But if people really want to try, I mean, go ahead. It's just not my it's not my first recommendation. If somebody asks me, what should I do to help bring about freedom and liberty in my lifetime? The first thing I wouldn't say is go join, go to political, run for political office. I would not say that. There's so many other things you can do first that are more effective.
Well, sadly, even the libertarians in the party that I knew, most of them weren't really pro-freedom. They would be tyrants on other people too. So it was very disheartening when I was in there to realize how many tyrants were even inside the Libertarian Party and would have infringed on other people's property, let alone states outside of the Libertarian Party. It really makes it kills any of the optimism and political activity that you were doing previous to. Let's jump to some of the other questions.
Yeah. I just wanted to how about some peaceful parenting? I'm curious to hear your opinion on peaceful parenting and the unschooling, homeschooling, and what are your views on that?
Yeah. So obviously, children should be our slaves, and we can beat them up. No, I'm just
no sarcasm there. No
right. Yeah. So I think it stems from the fact that I think that you have a quasi homestead right over your child in the essence of nobody else can come in here and tell you feed them celery instead of broccoli, right? And subjective theory of value does make this very hard, right? Because if you're beating your kid, what's the line? Who can come in and tell you when and not to?
Yeah.
There are obviously some gray areas here, but I think that the peaceful parenting has some very good tenets, just like the non-aggression principle. Although it can be subjectively taken from various viewpoints, it does have some objective root, right? So it gives us some axis to go off of. And the peaceful parenting, I think, is just an extension of that into children. Because the question is, when is capacity? And another question is, do we own our children? And although we have that quasi-homesteaded right, we do not have the right to enslave other humans, and they are humans. And I can't just get my kid to go off to a labor camp for 18 hours a day, and he sleeps 6, and I'll toss him some of the beans into the dungeon, right? I mean, my whole point here is that we don't own our children. We are simply a blip in the map of their lives, trying to help them become something more responsible, more attainable, to understand, hopefully, once again, not to infringe on others, etc., but to not only tell them about these things and teach them these principles, but to also set the example. And I think peaceful parenting is once again another consistent act inside of the non-aggression principle in a voluntary society, in which people respect their children enough to treat them just like they would another human being. And sometimes I don't want to. Some humans treat other humans horribly, but I think on the norm, what we see is if I have a problem with somebody else, I can't just like somebody parked kind of crooked in a parking spot, right? And I want them to park straighter. This is just an example. I can't walk over there and punch them in the face or bend them over and slap them or anything else. I mean, that's a crime. That is an outright crime. Mm-hmm. But why does it change when it's with our children, right? Do we want to teach our children that violence is truly the answer? Because we know violence distorts the real answer. It's a cover-up of real teaching and real learning. So we know it only hampers a child's learning abilities. And it's, I think one of the things that's really important to take away from this is that peaceful parenting even goes as far as saying not to spank your children. And I agree with this. I don't spank my son. Of course, spanking at 2 years old, he wouldn't even really understand what the heck's going on, which is sad because some children are actually spanked at 1 year old, and it's like, what are you doing? The kid has no idea from cause and effect. They can't pick that up until at least 20 months plus, right? So not only are the parents just completely short-sighted on what's realistic as far as learning from a child perspective, but on the other hand is beating up this kid or hitting them and physically impairing them, is that really the best way to treat or to train and show other people how to interact with other humans? I think, if anything, that it is true that people who are spanked go off to are statistically more incarcerated, right? They have higher incarceration rates. They have more domestic violence. They have more abuse, fights, etc. More problems, more learning disabilities. I mean, these things are documented too, that the more physical abuse, the worse it gets, right? So there is even a proportional scale to it as well, right? I'm not saying it's exponentially there, but there is obviously positive correlation. And I think it's important for us to realize that because we don't own our kids, we should try to treat them just like we would another human, and to give them the same respect. That's kind of my short answer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. When I had my wife had her child in 2010, I think the next year I discovered Stefan Molyneux's video on spanking, and that was the first Stefan Molyneux video I saw, and then that's when it kind of opened the floodgates of everything else that he was talking about. And it really opened my eyes, because I remember me and my wife, before we had kids, we were saying, we're gonna spank our kids, right? Yeah, I mean, if he's bad, he's probably a little smack. That's because that's what you grow up in,
because you want to be good parents.
Yeah, you think that's the best thing.
Parenting.
That's what you experience. So you think, how can my parents be evil or something, or bad, or anything they did was good, so right?
Exactly.
You had good intentions.
And I think the good intention thing is really a bad cover up, but it also does have some legitimacy. Obviously, if parents who spank usually are trying to do the right thing, they're just doing the wrong thing
Yeah.
That's all it is. I mean, most of them don't have 4-year psychology degrees or child development degrees. I mean, like, let's be real. They're just, most of them don't even have any degrees. And I'm not saying degrees are even important. What I'm saying is they don't even research any of this stuff. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at here. Because the whole degree thing's a whole nother field. But my whole point is, most parents simply, when you don't have to pass a litmus test to have children, right? Sadly, I guess you do. The litmus test is that you have a seed or an egg, and that you meet somebody else with a seed or an egg, right? I mean, and then you're not able to. That's pretty much the base one. So outside of that, there's not much else to really hold people's feet to the fire, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like, you don't have to be smart to have kids. So how do we can't expect them all to know all these things about statistics as far as spanking and the rest of that goes, because any child, almost all people now in child development will tell you spanking is not a good thing. It's detrimental to the child's cognitive abilities, etc. So I think science has really won out on this issue through case studies, scientific evidence, scientific method, and spanking overall, consequentialistly and utilitarian wise, is harmful, and deontologically, it's in my opinion, going above and beyond true discipline, and is an infringement on the non-aggression principle. But once again, I'm not going to go around and tackle other parents who spank, but I will definitely do what I can to voice my opinion and let them understand that I disdain.
Yes, exactly. Well, I don't want to keep you too long, but I just want to say one more thing before we sign off. Is one interesting argument I get is, but you have to respect your elders.
Oh, yeah.
And I find that funny. And when somebody told me that, it was a family member, and when they said that to me, I'm like, so does that mean I should respect Charles Manson because he's older than me? I'm like, no.
Well, define respect. That's the thing. They never define respect means do whatever I say. That's what it equates. And first of all, if I'm going to, I try to respect everybody, right? Like, not infringing on other people. I think we should respect everybody, not just elders. So it's like they're not defining terms. They're not being objective. It's just another term to try to get control over another person. And I see right through that excuse. And once again, it's because they were fed that line and they thought, well, maybe that's right, and so they did it, and that's what they were raised into. So it's hard once again when you're fighting this uphill social norm battle, and most of the people just are still stuck in yesteryear.
Oh, I get that all the time too. When my son does something wrong or hits somebody and I sit him down and I want to talk to him and say why. I'm explaining things to him, and then I get from family members, look at him, he's just trying to control you. You have to be the one in control. He's trying to control. I'm like, no, it's not about control. That's the whole problem. That's what everybody seems to think. I'm not trying to control him. And I don't think he's trying to control me. It's like kids. People think kids are like these little deceived manipulators. It's trying to do something with my brain or something. Yeah,
well, technically, we're all a little bit trying to get our way. Once again, manipulation is another one of those terms. It's kind of like greed. It's kind of like so subjective. It's like, well, how do you quantify it?
True.
How many utils do I have to have until I'm? What was the term you were just using?
Manipulate.
Yeah. How many utils of manipulation do I have? Right. I mean, you can't quantify it. It's just it's something that's intangible, and that's the reason they use it. Once again, it's an emotional bias. I think it's searching for confirmation bias in whatever argument they say is right. Right. I mean, that's just the way it goes. So.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Michael. Thank you very much for the conversation. Can you let everybody know where they can find your work or your videos?
Right now, and I know I got a lot of people upset about this, but I have made my videos private. Sure, you can find lots of them. People have reposted them all over the internet, but my personal channels right now, while I'm in the private sector and trying to scrunch these $1 million deals, I really have to be careful with who sees me where. So this is why I haven't even taken an interview. You're the first one. I told Cheryl I was going to do one. She was like, seriously? You've been turning them down? I was like, yeah, because I like this guy, first of all. Second of all, I want to support his channel. Well, I do. I love peaceful anarchism, and I wanted to see it do well and to grow. And, Voluntary Virtues Network, you've been a supporter of that, so I had to swing back the favor the other way. And, really, in essence, it's just kind of like I don't have a channel right now to point people at. But I would tell you guys to go to the Voluntary Virtues Network channel, support all the other great show hosts that we have over there on that network. And I do appreciate your guys' support and spreading the video rounds and helping us get the show and the channel up and going. And if you actually want, any of you out there think you want to take a stab at it, one time before I met Mr. Cuellar here, he wasn't doing videos, and now he is, and he's doing really good at them. And I'm so glad that I talked to him about doing this stuff, because I think I set off a nice big fireworks right here, and the explosion's just at the beginning of this long cosmic firework explosion. So I hope I can create more of these explosions down the road. If you want to be a part of this explosion, contact me over on Facebook, Mike Shanklin, and we'll definitely work something out.
Awesome. Yes, I'm very delighted to be a part of the Voluntary Virtues Network family. It's been a wonderful experience for me. So thank you very much, Michael, for that and for the conversation. So this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network and the consciousresistance.com and the seedsofliberty.com. Wishing everyone have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.
Bye, guys.